And on the line with us is Blaine Winship. Blaine is an attorney, author of Moralnomics, The Moral Path to Prosperity, contributor to the Conservative HQ blog. His website is Moralnomics, moralnomics.com. You can tweet him at Blaine Winship, BlaineWinship. Blaine, welcome.
It's good to be here. How are you?
I am fine. So why is it moral for us to shut down public schools across the country and turn them over to for-profit profiteers?
Well, I wouldn't say that that's moral. I wouldn't say it's immoral either. It depends on what you're out to do and why you're out to do that. I'm not sure that that is necessarily what is going on. If, as I understood it, you wanted to talk a bit about the nomination of Betsy DeVos to be the education secretary.
And right, and she comes out of a capitalist
agenda. She's a agenda.
She's a billionaire. She comes out of this whole capitalist mindset, and has been a huge advocate in Michigan. I grew up in Michigan. In fact, I was there last week. The DeVos family has incredible influence on that state and has pushed a number of school privatization projects, many of which have failed terribly. And why would it be a good thing to insert the profit motive into a public good? Education has been viewed as part of the commons since the George Washington administration. Thomas Jefferson was so proud of the fact that he created a free university, the University of Virginia, literally free, that he said, instead of putting my being president of the United States on my tombstone, put that I was the founder of the University of Virginia. It doesn't even say on his tombstone that he was president, because at his choice, he thought that being, the University of Virginia, the Virginia Declaration of Religious Freedom, and the author of the Declaration of Independence were far more important. Why would we sacrifice that on the altar of some billionaire's idea of how to make other people rich?
Well, I don't know that that is her idea. I understand you know a lot about her from prior experience, but my view of this is very different. I agree with you in the sense that education is what I would consider to be an infrastructure. But the question of who should provide it and under what circumstances and upon what terms is a different issue. To me, you could say food's an infrastructure, but we definitely have a strong private sector for providing food, and on the whole, it does a pretty good job. And the question of, who's going to provide education and who's going to do a better job of it, I like the concept of competition. I like the idea of people having options. I don't like the idea of there being a monopoly. I do like the idea of universal education. I like the idea that children will be free to attend, that is free in the sense of having the freedom of choice, to attend schools of their choice and not being captives of any particular monopolistic approach. The end result that we want to achieve is to have, well, at least from my standpoint, is to have children who are well educated to become good and productive citizens in this country.
I'm always, if you look at the United States, when we had virtually nothing but a public education system in this country, let's say from the 19 teens to the 1980s, we had one of the best education systems in the world. We had the best educational outcomes in the world. Europe, which has no private, there are private schools everywhere for very wealthy people, but as basic primary education, as basic public education, European countries have spectacular schools. Finland is at the top of the list always, and there's no private component to that at all. It looks to me like what has happened, Blaine, is the classic thing that David Stockman said, that in his kind of tell-all book, that the Reagan administration was actually explicitly, like in meetings in the cabinet room, literally, this was their plan. You find government agencies or government functions which could be done privately and could earn $1 in the private market, and thus be subject to the pressures of competition that you're talking about, that in this theology means that it will be better. You break those things to the point by cutting their funding to the point where they don't work anymore. Then you stand there and say, look at that, that's broken. And that provides the justification for privatizing it. And, whether it's Social Security, whether it's Medicare, whether it's public education. And you know, there's been no shortage of these. And Stockman at the time was a true believer. He became later horrified by it. But that is the sales pitch that we're getting from both Betsy DeVos, the foundations associated with her, and all these other groups. And frankly, from reading your blog, it seems like that's your position.
No, well, my position is, in a sense, a variation, but it's different from that. But just to back up, because you covered a lot of ground here, I have a number of friends who are products of European schools, and their view is that American public education is a joke. What's gone wrong?
Yeah, we're 35th in the world. But before Reagan's presidency, we were number 2 in the world.
It's not a problem of funding. It's a problem of the quality of the curriculum our children are getting. And if you want to look at what's happened to public education since you put in the year 1980, if you want to look and see what's happened to public education, you know, I would say it has everything to do with the lack of values and lack of discipline for our children in the classroom. And the proof is in the pudding here. You know, the reason why we're having all these discussions about vouchers and charter schools isn't just because Ronald Reagan liked the idea or Betsy DeVos likes the idea. It's that the parents themselves like the idea. They are overwhelmingly rejecting the status quo that the liberals in the Democratic Party have imposed upon us.
Because their public schools their public schools have been harmed. We were building new schools like crazy in the 50s and 60s. We're not doing that anymore, except in wealthy neighborhoods. We have a public education system in this country right now, largely based on the property tax, which virtually guarantees that your zip code is going to determine the quality of your education. And I understand, you know, if you live in a poor neighborhood or a poor area and somebody comes along and says you got a crappy school, you say, yeah, you know, let's acknowledge that. It's you know, the schools in downtown Lansing, Michigan are a whole lot worse than those in the wealthy suburb of Holt, where I was, you know, a weekend ago. And the same is true all over the country. That's a structural problem that has to do actually with money. And you know, we could fix that with money.
You are altogether ignoring.
And the other part. No, well, let me just finish, and then I'll let you go on, Blaine.
To go to wealthy suburbs, to go to
the other point.
Wanting other alternatives.
Well, hang on. Just a second. Maybe you and I agree on this. I don't know. The other point that you made is, you know, the breakdown in respect and all this kind of thing. And what we have seen once again is that the prosperity, the standard of living, the ability to even not live in debt of the bottom 50% of Americans has declined substantially since the 1980s as a consequence of this huge experiment of Reaganomics, of trickle-down economics, that has made, you know, billionaires, multi-billionaires, that has made a small number of people really, really spectacularly rich, and they do a great job of funding all these right-wing think tanks. Well, Betsy DeVos, case in point, but it has basically left, you know, communities poor. And poverty is the biggest single indicator of whether a school will be successful or a student will be successful in school or not is the wealth of their parents. And you know that. So if you want to solve the problem, go back and do what Lyndon Johnson did.
Well, go ahead. This is your show.
I'm done.
I don't know when you want me to speak, but go ahead.
I'm done. Go ahead.
To listen to you.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say there were so many aspects of this. I mean, in my book, Moralnomics, I go into a whole lot of the problems that we've had with what I call this unholy marriage of big business and big government that leads to a top-down society. And I point out, I try to educate up the readers with regard to how this ends up creating a lack of economic prosperity, a lack of a strong middle class, a lack of upward opportunity, mobility for people, and you generate a few rich billionaires. I mean, the Russians have them, the Chinese have them, and yeah, we have them, but that doesn't mean that we should throw out free enterprise and throw out dedicating an education system to trying to help our children to become able to perform.
I think that we would do much better if we followed Finland than if we followed, you know, communist China or you know, pretty raw capitalist Russia. You know, it's Russia, you know, has made huge steps. I mean, they've been a democracy for a total of what, 30 years now. You know, I don't think that you can use that as an example. But if you look at the democracies of Europe, which have been democracies, you know, roughly as long as we have, or in some cases just 50 years less, they're not doing public schools. They don't have, they're conservatives. I've done my show from a number of European countries, and I always try to get conservatives on to talk to them. And they're all in favor of public education. Nobody in their wildest dreams would think of privatizing public education.
Well, the concept of what you call democracy in Europe, on the continent, is different from what I talk about in my book.
I'm
about
sure.
Where we should go in terms of having bottom-up economic freedom and bottom-up political freedom. It's very different. It's much more top-down government in-your-face control in Europe. And I disagree about the Soviet Union having turned into a meaningful democracy, and that it's made a lot of progress since then. I think a lot of Russians I speak to would differ with you greatly about that. I mean, this kind of praise that you're hearing.
Well, again, then don't use them as the example that you're going to say, we should compare American schools to Russian schools or Chinese schools. I think if we're going to compare American schools to anybody, we should compare them to schools from countries that have been democracies on the order of at least a century. Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany. They all have robust public schools. Italy. I don't know if you've watched Michael Moore's movie now, Where to Invade Next, but there's a section in there on the schools that'll just bring tears to your eyes. It's amazing.
I'm not opposed to public schools. I'm simply in favor of more options for people to serve what the parents and the children themselves want. If they, with their own, shall we say, votes about where they want their children to go to school, if they want them to go to public schools, and if public schools are competing and are worthy of having them there, great. I'm for that. But I like the idea of there being a kind of a tension.
But you're creating a false choice,
where you have to perform and provide really good quality goods and services to people because they have an alternative.
I agree, but you're defining the choice is what's happening. I mean, in some part, a lot of the public school system problem that we have in this country came out of Jim Crow. And it was that let's keep funding of schools local. Well, why would you do that? So that poor communities remain with poor schools because they were by and large black communities, and so that wealthy communities have good schools, and they were by and large white communities. And it was set up that way. I mean, this evolved that way out of Reconstruction, and out of Horace Mann advocated that in the 1880s, and the great champion of education. I've written books on this. And so when you give people this false choice of would you like this really crappy public school, but it's crappy because we designed a system in order to keep it crappy because you happen to have been born in a poor area, versus would you like a voucher to go to a better school? Sure, anybody's going to say, sure, I'll take the voucher. But then you've got, if it's going to a for-profit company, you've got somebody skimming money off the top that could have been used for education. That doesn't seem moral to me.
Well, that doesn't square with the facts in a number of ways. First of all, if you want in these school areas and in depressed areas and poorer areas, if you want the public schools to perform better, there's got to be some kind of a competitive push for them to do that.
Why?
But they've remained awful all these years, and they're awful in their
because
curriculum,
because of the funding mechanism for them.
But you think it all comes down to money, and that's
I really do. I mean, you can look at poor schools in this country over the last 100 years and see this.
Money. The biggest problem we have is core values that for these children, they're not getting the kinds of values that lead to them wanting to take a good education. They are rejecting academia.
Well, to the extent that there may be some truth to what you're saying, you're making my poverty argument.
We can't have that.
You just made my argument. If you're going to create an economic system,
what I'm saying to you is, I'm talking about whatever system is going to generate the kind of outcome that the parents and children want or should want, and that we as taxpayers and as citizens in this country should want as the result of people getting this education. We are spending a fortune. We spend over $150,000 for each of these kids to get a high school diploma.
Rhetorically, I don't disagree with you, George. Or Blaine. I'm sorry, I keep calling you George. Blaine, thanks. Hang on just a second.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Blaine Winship. You can read it all about it over in his blog at Moralnomics, Moralnomics. Blaine, thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Good talking with you.